Now it's my pleasure to welcome our distinguished speakers to our plenary session on inclusive governance and the social integration of immigrants. I would like to welcome Kapil Longani, Senior Vice Chancellor for Legal Affairs and General Counsel at the State University of New York, Dr. Alejandro Portaz, Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Princeton University and Research Professor of Law and Distinguished Scholar of Arts and Sciences at the University of Miami, Charles Sherman, Manager of Narrative Strategy at the Opportunity Agenda, and Natasha Lay, Executive Director at Bow Valley Immigration Partnership. Each of our speakers will share reflections on a set of questions that we have provided to them. Their reflections will give us a window to the work that they've been doing, whether they're studying, evaluating, or advancing cohesive communities within the communities that they work in those various spaces. We've asked each of our panelists to reflect on the barriers that immigrants and communities face in the spaces that they occupy, and the forces that hinder social integration and community cohesion, as well as the strategies that help, that were successful in their world in building trust, belonging, and removing obstacles. And each panelist will speak for about 8 minutes, and then we will open the floor up for discussions and further questions from you, the audience. Please use the Q&A to communicate with us and engage with the speakers. Keep your mic muted if you don't mind, so we can keep this on track. We have very limited time. And so we will start with Senior Vice Chancellor Longani, and is Vice Chancellor here? The Senior Vice Chancellor is not here, but Dr. Alejandro Portaz is here. I can see you. Dr. Portaz, your work has been, you really are a legend in this field. Your work has been a guiding post for all of us in this area of research and scholarship. You have made incredible contributions to our understanding of how integration takes place. And so the question that we ask you is, how can social integration be enabled by institutions and within community context? What lessons have you learned through your research and scholarship about social integration and community cohesion? Dr. Portaz.
Thank you, Dinah. Thank you to you and to Guillermo for your kind invitation to taking part in this major conference. I'm honored to be present and to be part of the invitation. And indeed, what the preceding speakers have said pretty much leads are the central conclusions of what we're going to reach. But as a scholar and a researcher, I think that that is the contribution that I can make to the conference is to highlight some key points of information and key concepts that have guided our research and our knowledge of the situation. It's really noteworthy that an institution like yours, shows itself to be concerned with the welfare and the integration of immigrants at a time when the national government is pursuing exactly the opposite strategy. Nevertheless, the first point that we have to make is that immigration is indispensable to the American economy at both ends of the labor market, both at the high end of professional and technical occupations, and also requiring advanced training, and also at the low end of manual occupations in agriculture and multiple services. Immigrants who come on temporary visas face a different situation than those who come with permanent resident visas. That's another distinction we have to make. The first type, temporary migrants, are, in a sense, what could be said in the country, but not yet of it. Their journey could be conceptualized as purely instrumental, while on the other hand, those with a permanent visa have made a commitment to restart a new life in the country, in the United States. In recent years, temporary labor programs like the H2 program and the H1B program, and the regular immigration system have admitted each about 1 million persons in the United States, each, and coming in under legal, either temporary or permanent. Family reunification is the primary driver, has been the primary driver of permanent immigration, while the labor needs of the economy at both ends of the market have been primarily the source of temporary migration. Um, that is to jump to the quick of what the purpose of this conference is. What we have found in successive studies of the integration of immigrants is that the most effective way for local communities and institutions to facilitate the integration of newcomers is to respect their languages and their culture, and to do so as to give them a space to gradually combine that is American language and culture with the language and culture that they have brought from the receiving country. This is called selective acculturation, and it has been much more effective both in the United States and in receiving European countries than forced assimilationism. That is a strategy that tells and compels immigrants to give up whatever they came from, to give up their languages, to give up that is to become like everyone else. No one becomes like everyone else like that. It's a gradual process, and the process that is more effective is to respect what immigrants bring with them, and allow and give them a space to gradually combine them through selective acculturation. That's the driving concept with with English and American culture. Incidentally, bilingualism, the preservation of the language skills brought from the sending country, along with the acquisition of English, have proven a post English or the language of any receiving country, be it Spanish, Spain, or France, and so on, have been a positive asset for both individuals and communities. Studies by educational researchers, not only in the US, but in other countries such as Canada and Spain, have demonstrated that fluent bilinguals perform actually better in schools, and have greater educational and occupational achievements in the long run than their monolingual peers. And that has been a regular finding in the research literature. A final issue, I don't want to exceed my time, is what position to take about the activities of immigrants toward their homelands. There was a time when the consensus that immigrants, at least permanent ones, left poverty and want in the receiving countries, and never returned to them. Once they left, that was it. They would never look back. The recent research literature has completely disproven this assertion by showing that immigrants always look back, both as individuals and as collectivities. As individuals, the proactive the act the practice of sending remittances to the families back home, in the aggregate amounting to billions of dollars, had been very important for sending countries. Many countries in the global south receive more income from immigrant remittances of their immigrants abroad than from foreign aids or even their own exports. And as a young Salvadorian sociologist told us in one conference recently, in a few years, migration and remittances are the true economic adjustment program of our country. At the collective level, the research literature reports the existence of hundreds of hometown associations created by immigrants to support their sending communities and regions. In Mexico, these associations are known as Comités de Oriundos, and their proliferation have led the Mexican government to create a program called the 3-for-1, in which every dollar contributed by a hometown association in the United States for public works in their sending communities is matched by a dollar from the Mexican federal government, a dollar from the state government, and the community benefiting from that. Hence, 3 for 1, tres por uno is the driving program. Among certain observers, these cross-national activities of immigrants trigger suspicion by indicating lingering loyalties to their homelands, and hence a slowing down of the process of integration. In fact, the research literature has shown repeatedly that these cross-national activities, that there is no contradiction between these cross-national activities and successful integration. As it turns out, immigrants most likely to involve themselves in collective initiatives in support of their home communities and countries are precisely those that have made most progress in the occupational and economic hierarchies of the receiving nation, in this case, the United States. It is only among those who have achieved a measure of occupational and economic security and success that one finds the time and resources to involve themselves in these collective activities. The driving concept that we use in the research literature about these activities is transnationalism. Transnationalism, and it is the concept coined to refer to these multinational activities of immigrants across national borders. Uh, Aside from benefiting hometowns and countries, these activities have proven have proven to contribute positively to the selective acculturation of individuals and immigrant communities, precisely by facilitating the blending of the old and the new. A few years ago, I published a book called The State and the Grassroots that described these cross-national activities of over 20 different immigrant groups in the United States and in 4 Western European countries. And in each of them, that was published in 2017, the pattern was the same, the pattern of adaptation and consequences of these transnational activities, both for the sending countries and for the integration of immigrants in the host nation. The problem that we confront at present is that the anti-immigrant policies of the present American administration are creating a strong disincentive for immigrants to continue coming, filling the needs of the labor economy, and for those already in the country to continue to engage with their communities back home. As the U.S. labor market continues to be dependent on new immigrants at both ends of the skills continuum, and as transnational activities are a central element in the lives and patterns of adaptation of immigrant communities in the past, the situation at present has become increasingly critical. That is not only because of the strong disincentive for immigrants to continue coming to the United States, which is an imperative for the American economy, as I mentioned before, at both ends of the labor market, and for those who are here to continue maintaining ties with the receiving nation and home communities as they had done in the past for the benefit of those communities, and also facilitating, not stopping, but facilitating their integration. Both of these initiatives are continuously compromised, and it is absolutely necessary for organizations like this, the one that is sponsoring this event, and for similar ones, they have an important role to play in resisting and in reversing the very negative consequences brought about by an increasingly radical nativist regime. Thank you.
Dr. Portas, thank you so much for giving us a wonderful review of the research literature and really emphasizing, this critical moment that we're in and how there are adverse and harmful impacts on not just the American economy, but also abroad, on communities abroad. Now I would like to turn over to Senior Vice Chancellor Kapil Longani. Vice Chancellor, you are in the space of higher education administration, administering one of the largest public education system, higher education system in the nation. And there's no doubt that the higher education space plays a leading role in the social integration of foreign-born Americans, foreign-born New Yorkers. Can you share with us your reflections on what lessons have you learned in your career, in your profession, related to social integration and community cohesion in the higher education space? Senior Vice Chancellor Longani.
Yes, hi, Dina. Thanks so much for inviting me to join this esteemed panel and be part of this conversation about a topic that is really personal to me. The issue of integration and the issue of belonging is critical for all of us who are immigrants. My parents and I are immigrants. I've spent a career in public service, really focused on leveling the playing field and ensuring that we have equity, inclusion, and justice, across the board, regardless of where we come from. But you can't level the playing field if people don't feel a sense of integration, a sense of belonging. I became a lawyer in large part because of an incident that happened decades ago that I think highlights the critical nature of your question. We moved to this country in the late 70s, and we couldn't afford a house for many, many years. And as you know, for many immigrants, owning a house is truly the epitome of the American dream. And I remember the first time after about a decade when we had obtained enough financial security to buy a house. And my dad and I, on the day that the house was closing, we went to the house to sign the papers and get the keys and everything. And, I can remember it as if it was yesterday. We walked into this house, and immediately the owner of the house and his broker reacted in a really bizarre way. They were startled. In fact, the broker's eyes and the owner's eyes became very, very big. And I realized they were very surprised to see my father. My dad's name is Hans Longani. And if you didn't know me, you might assume that he is of Italian or German descent, and therefore possibly a white man. But the reality is he's a dark-skinned brown man with an Indian accent. And so the minute they saw him, the owner turns to the broker and he says, "We don't sell to people that don't look like us." That moment was, I think, the first time in my life that I felt like a foreigner in my own country. And it was that moment that inspired me to spend my life, my professional life, fighting for equality so that others wouldn't be denied opportunities on the basis of their skin color or where they come from. I've been really lucky to work for leaders in my professional life like John King, the late great Elijah Cummings, Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa, who understood that without giving people a sense of belonging, without a sense of integration into society, you can't bring out the best in people. It's especially true for people like us that come from other countries. And I challenge you to find a successful organization that doesn't have significant contributions from people born in other countries. For example, the American Immigration Council found that nearly half of today's Fortune 500 companies were founded by either immigrants or the children of immigrants. And that's because people from other cultures bring a richness and intellectual diversity that can only exist in heterogeneous societies like the United States. And I think SUNY, under Chancellor King, is a great example of an organization that thrives because of its inclusiveness. In fact, it's in our DNA. SUNY was established 75 years ago, and its mission was to provide to the people of New York educational services of the highest quality with the broadest possible access. The broadest possible access. And that, of course, means immigrants. That means people from other countries. And our chancellor and the board, including Chairman Tisch, have really remained steadfast in their commitment that SUNY is going to reflect the rich diversity of our state, of our country, of this world, so that every member of our community feels welcomed and valued. You know, we have many programs like the Educational Opportunity Program, the Advancing Success and Associate Pathways, the Accelerate, Complete, and Engage program, otherwise known as ACE and ASAP. All of these programs focus on students with financial needs, and they provide academic supports, including career advising and tutoring. And many of the students who are part of these programs are first-generation students and or foreign-born. I remember the Turkish earthquake that happened a few years ago, and the University of Albany held a community event on campus in which they engaged the Turkish students and the SUNY community, and they performed, you know, there was Turkish music, performances, speeches, just to ensure that our students felt welcome, safe, and supported during a time of tragedy. The goal of SUNY, of course, is really to make sure that this becomes a second home. We know it's not their first home, but we want it to be their second home. And as I said, I learned very early on in my life how critical that sense of belonging is, because the feeling of being a foreigner in a country can be deeply disengaging. And it's really important that we have resources, not just at SUNY, but in organizations all across our state, to ensure that we do whatever we can to foster a sense of belonging amongst our foreign-born residents.
Senior Vice Chancellor Longani, thank you so much. Your story resonates with many of us, and truly thank you for sharing it. It's really and reminding us that it's not just integration doesn't only happen at the institutional or the policy level or the program level, really happens at the relational level, at the one-on-one interactions in our communities. And so it's really important to recognize that we are in a global village, and it's only by embracing the traditions and the cultures and the languages and the differences that we all share, but also the common elements that we all also collectively have, is where integration going to really take place. So I'd like to turn it around to Charles Sherman. Charles, the Opportunity Agenda is really a leading organization doing a lot of work in really trying to implement these changes one community at a time, and really testing narratives and changing, reframing the narratives about immigrants and fostering a fact-based portrait of the foreign-born. We'd like you to reflect on the lessons you've learned throughout doing that work, on what worked, what didn't, and what strategies do you recommend to advance social integration at the community level?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Dina. And for the tech organizers, I'm trying to get my video on, but getting unable to start video message just to flag that for the host, but I'll just get going anyways. Dina, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this conference. Here we go. As Dina mentioned, I'm Charlie Sherman. I'm the manager of narrative strategy at the Opportunity Agenda. We're a social justice communications lab. We help communicators, advocates, organizers, people who work in cultural spaces, really anyone committed to social justice, figure out how to communicate their issue most persuasively, effectively, and really fight for long-term narrative change for a range of issues across the country. In my role with the Opportunity Agenda, I've spent the last couple of years overseeing our immigrant justice portfolio, which really centers around kind of three ways we work towards goals of integration, equity for migrants, immigrants, and really changing the narrative around immigration. The first is doing participatory research projects with organizers across the country to really understand what their narrative challenges are and how we can help them sort of chart a new path towards building the public imagination around a pro-immigrant future and really building, public support for the integration and success and thriving of immigrants immigrants, right? And again, what other speakers have said, trying to push organizers to get beyond a place of just survival for folks coming to this country, but really trying to think, what does it look like for immigrants in our communities to thrive and really be able to succeed and live dignified lives? The second is research dissemination, which I know is how Dina kind of found out about the work that we do, really trying to share emerging research that's coming out of the social sciences, some of the amazing academics that I'm sure y'all interact with on a frequent basis, as well as other nonprofit organizations, to really try to get learnings in the hands of folks, make sure that research doesn't sit on a shelf, but rather that people feel confident, no matter whether they're just a local organizer all the way to doing comms at a national organization, to harness the power of really amazing research that folks are doing on integration, on public opinion around immigration, and things like that. And the third is really capacity building, trying to strengthen communicators' ability to persuade the audiences that they need to really pass policy, to change culture, and to change the larger story around many issues, but in this case, immigration and integration. And I can talk a bit more about what kind of each of those things looks like. I also want to add, I'm a recent graduate from UCLA's Masters of Social Science program, where I studied a bit with Cecilia Menyavar, who I'm sure many folks know on this call, who is a really preeminent researcher on integration, and her thinking deeply kind of shapes a lot of the work that I take with me at TOA. So just wanted to give her a shout out quickly. But what do all those things kind of look like in practice, right? This effort of really trying to help communicators and organizers say what they want to say as effectively as they can, right? So often I describe the work we do as taking the idea of what do people want to say and helping them think through what's the actual most effective way to say it and who are they hoping to say it to and what kind of change they want to have. So, for example, the participatory research we do, we just wrapped up in 2024 a three-phase research project where we took cohorts of advocates in Arizona, Iowa, Michigan, and New York, all folks who are really bought into using strategic communications, trying to use communications effectively to build public support for immigrants, for integration, for a more pro-immigrant world, et cetera. What we did is we designed a three-phase research project with them that really started with, at first, just deep listening. What are the barriers that they find in their everyday organizing to be able to bring this world into existence, right? Like, what is the story that their core constituencies and audiences are telling themselves about immigrants, the role of immigration in this country, about integration, those types of things. And then ask them, what would sort of the liberatory narrative around immigration be for your organization? The way I put it is, like, what would put your organization out of work, right? So if everyone in your state, in your region, thought this way, it would mean you wouldn't necessarily need a robust pro-immigrant movement, right? Because the sort of social supports, the policy supports, all of those things would be ingrained. In the second phase, with those same cohort members and all this research was co-designed, we did a metaphor elicitation process to understand, okay, we know where people are at when they have views that turn them away from immigrants, that create those us-them divides, all the sort of things that really get in the way of integration, especially from the sort of public opinion perspective. And we just did long-form interviews with folks to really give them a prompt of, okay, what if the U.S. did immigration vastly different than the way we do it now, right? What would excite you? What makes you nervous? What could actually feel feasible in this new future? What are the things that are non-negotiables, et cetera? And then the third phase, we took all those kinds of insights, those narrative pathways of how do you take people from thinking one way to another onto the ground, and did some public opinion polling and message testing that we then did trainings and briefings across all these different regions and states to really equip organizers and activists with really current and timely public opinion findings, but also messages that we knew could help really change the narrative in each of their regions and their issues. And then when we talk about campaigns, what that looks like is out of one of our cohort members from New York, the New York Immigration Coalition, we were able to re-grant them $25,000 to launch a public art narrative change campaign called Immigrants Are New York. I can drop some links in the chat for that campaign later. If you take a bus and subway in the last 6 months, or especially in September, you most likely saw these while passing through the city. We showcase diversity of immigrant New Yorkers trying to really drum up the argument that immigrants are an essential part of the civic and social fabric of New York. We had people who were DJs, we had people who were lawyers, we had people who were composers, really the whole kind of spectrum of what does it mean to contribute in a city like New York, right? Not just the economic contributions, but really the cultural spectrum as well. And that was able to grow from really a $25,000 initial re-grant to them to they were able to turn into a $500,000 ad buy that was on bus, subway, had public installations in Times Square, downtown Brooklyn, and parts of Queens as well. So that's just one example of how we try to translate research into actual campaigns that will impact people's lives, that will shape public opinion. And then third, just generally trying to build the capacity of the movement to really understand what's needed in an era of disinformation, an era of misinformation, an era of really intentional divisiveness. There are really kind of crucial windows and moments where we have to be strategic about what we're kind of communicating, what we are advocating for. I think, with everything happening in LA and across the country, it's one of those moments where people are really being exposed to the enforcement regime of immigration in ways that they're often not, right? And those moments are the types of moments that we really train people to capitalize on, to say, okay, there's this sort of opportunity to shift the public imagination window happening right now around integration, around immigration. What are the best practices for doing that, and how can we help you? So that's a bit of what we do at the Opportunity Agenda. I'm excited to jump a bit more into the conversation later and talk to my fellow panelists. Thanks, Dina.
Charles, thank you so much. I'd like to turn it now to Natasha Lay, our fourth speaker. And Natasha, we understand you are using slides to give us an overview of the four-step process that you are using at your organization, which is called Workforce Inclusion Charter. And we see that it's a really wonderful model that can be replicated because it has a positive impacts. You're working with employers, and immigrants, and really trying to foster that integration on both ends. Take it away, Natasha.
Thank you so much, Dina. I'm grateful to be part of this important conversation today. Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha Lay. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director at the Bow Valley Immigration Partnership in Alberta, Canada. We're a cross-sector partnership working through collective action to create a collective impact to create a more welcoming and inclusive community for all. Today, as Dina mentioned, I'll be sharing with you a cross-sector model for immigrant integration that's working in our region, not just in theory, but on the ground. So this is me in 2019. I came to Canada from Australia on a working holiday visa for just 2 years, or so I thought. I spoke the language and the culture felt familiar, but I still faced moments of disconnection, uncertainty, and culture shock. Then someone opened a door for me. They connected me to local supports I didn't even know I needed. I started volunteering, found community, started a family. I found belonging. I may have come for the mountains, but I stayed for the people. And this isn't just my story. Many newcomers come to our region with short-term intentions and end up staying much longer. But the question is, how do we build systems that turn that temporary presence into lasting belonging and true integration? Integration is not automatic. It takes intentional effort and shared responsibility. We all have a role to play in building communities where newcomers don't just live, they can thrive and truly belong. Welcome to the Bow Valley. Just a quick introduction. This is now the place that I call home. It's a small community in rural Alberta in Canada on Treaty 7 territory. You might be familiar with Banff National Park. It's beautiful and depends on tourism. We have about 24,000 residents. About 1 in 3 was born outside of Canada. We come from over 100 countries. Foreign-born residents are essential to our economy and contribute to a vibrant community. Our workforce is global, but even in a place that is designed to welcome visitors from all over the world, inclusion isn't guaranteed. So the Bow Valley Immigration Partnership was founded in 2014. We're funded by the Canadian government to bring together a place-based cross-sector leadership group. Our vision is for a Bow Valley that values diversity and supports the inclusion and integration of all residents. Here's what some of our research shows. Immigrants told us that we feel welcome, but not always included. They told us that they were facing challenges at work, like culture and language barriers. Some were told they couldn't speak their language in the workplace. And employers told us that they want to help, but they often don't know how. So this is where our innovative workplace inclusion charter comes in. What we know is that integration is a two-way process and must go beyond individual effort. It must be designed into systems. Integration is our shared responsibility, and a shared vision can lead to shared action. The Workplace Inclusion Charter model is founded on this idea and gives us something to work toward. It connects businesses, nonprofits, government, settlement services, community leaders, and more. It's a practical roadmap with structure, support, and accountability. When employers implement changes to policy and practice, we end up with more inclusive workplaces and communities where integration is embedded into local systems. Integration might not be the top priority for everyone, but it is our shared responsibility. In 2018, we piloted the Workplace Inclusion Charter with 8 local employers. Our primary focus was integration of newcomers to Canada. We've since expanded the program to take on an intersectional approach, and it's strengthened our cross-sector collaboration by aligning our inclusion efforts. We've already seen at least 12 other communities in Canada adopt the charter model as a way of sharing responsibility for integration. The charter follows 4 simple steps. First, we co-design. We bring together partners with lived experience and subject matter expertise representing the settlement sector, the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, people with disabilities, multilingual learners, industry associations, and human rights organizations. Each year, we create a list of specific, practical, impactful, and employer-vetted commitments where each partner agency can lead and provide support to employers to implement. Once we have our shortlist, employers can join the charter. They commit. Employers pledge to take meaningful action within a set timeframe. They select from the list of commitments and announce a plan for accountability. The third step is for employers to act. They work to implement those commitments. They receive training, a toolkit of resources, tailored support, peer mentorship, and more. And our fourth step is to celebrate. We recognize participating employers as bronze, silver, or gold workplace inclusion champions based on what they've successfully completed. We hold an award ceremony, we take out advertisements, and we recognize the local employers who are doing that good work. These 4 stages make the big task of integration and inclusion practical, actionable, and visible. This year, we have 16 commitments in the areas of community connection, policy or procedure, training, and communication. Some of the practical commitments we ask employers to take on include embedding supported referral pathways to settlement and community supports. So that means that as soon as a new foreign-born employee arrives in a participating workplace, they can be immediately referred to a settlement support service. Something that used to take months or years now just takes a day or 2. Employers can commit to implementing a flexible time-off policy, which means recognizing diverse cultural, religious, and personal needs beyond standard vacation and sick leave. We ask signatories to undertake plain language training because it helps all employees understand important information. And employers can implement our multilingual and multicultural emergency planning checklist. Some of this would be overwhelming if employers were doing it by themselves, but they're not. These actions are backed by organizations with lived experience and subject matter experts. Employers also benefit from sharing with one another, exchanging ideas, resources, and troubleshooting together. 2024 was our biggest year yet. While one employer completing one training can seem like a small action, here's what collective impact looks like. In 2014, we signed on 26 employers with 70 workplaces of all sizes and across many sectors. In just 8 months, they collectively completed 834 actions. Some were easier than others. And by participating in the charter, these workplaces collectively benefited 5,933 employees, which is about 37% of our region's workforce. This collective impact is what shared responsibility looks like at scale. Employers join the charter for a number of reasons, and goodwill is just one of them. Research by Deloitte, Catalyst, and McKinsey shows that diverse and inclusive businesses perform better. Here's what our local data shows. 79% of our employers reported improved employee morale or retention. It's one of the reasons employers buy into the program. 89% reported that their workplaces would be better prepared to grow inclusion efforts, meaning that the charter is a step in the right direction. And 93% implemented new or improved inclusion practices. That's a big systemic change that will continue to have an ongoing positive impact. The charter model doesn't ask employers to do everything, but to do something and to do it together. So here are the 4 things that have worked for us with the Bow Valley Workplace Inclusion Charter. Firstly, positioning integration as a shared responsibility, not siloing integration work to just governments or settlement services or nonprofit. Secondly, to start with what's practical. This work can be overwhelming and it's difficult to know where to start. Our success has come from keeping things accessible, realistic, and relevant. You don't need a big budget or consultant to get started. The third is that place shapes practice. What works in Banff will be different to what works in New York or other areas. The charter succeeds because it was shaped by and for local context. So we take the macro global approach and apply it locally. Integration tools must always reflect local realities and evolve with emerging needs. And number 4, celebrate every success. The charter gives us stories to tell, like when a local restaurant adds interpretation support for their employees, that's meaningful integration work. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to a collective effort for a more inclusive community. I came to Canada expecting to stay for just 2 years. What made me stay wasn't a job or a visa, it was someone who opened a door. That act of trust and connection changed everything. That's what the Workplace Inclusion Charter helps to create for us. It's not just a model, it's a structure for shared leadership. It brings employers, service providers, and governments into alignment. It turns good intentions into practical action. This isn't just about the Bow Valley, it's about what's possible anywhere we take a shared approach. Imagine a charter model in New York City. What would that look like? Imagine the ripple effects. What would shared responsibility for embedded integration look like across the nation? Integration doesn't start at citizenship. It starts when institutions, workplaces, and communities commit to a shared vision, responsibility, and action. Belonging isn't something people just find. Belonging is something we need to build together. This is not the time to step back from inclusion work. It's the moment to double down on it. So today, as we're talking about inclusive governance, I leave you with this. What would successful immigrant integration look like in your community if no sector worked in isolation? What are your hopes? What could be possible? I encourage you to dream big because when unlikely allies come together, great things happen. Thank you.
Natasha, thank you. This is incredibly impressive. I just have a lot of questions, and I really wanted to open it up to the audience. Please jot down your questions, your comments in the chat, and we will try to respond to them as they come in. Just one question for you, Natasha. So you asked us to imagine a system very much like the system that you're implementing in Bow Valley. And I wanted to ask, in this environment where there is a lot of anti-immigrant and anti-outsider or the othering of immigrants, have you faced any resistance? Granted, you are in a different country. Our question is, what resistance have you faced, and what was the rationale that you used, or the narrative that you used to incentivize employers to come to the table? What does the outreach or onboarding of employers look like on your end?
Thanks, Dina. As I mentioned, our region is primarily tourism focused. I encourage you all to come and visit. This is the beautiful Lake Louise. But we do see people from all around the world. So we've always been welcoming to visitors, but like any community across Canada and the United States, we're not immune to the international anti-immigrant sentiment. So we have faced resistance along the way. And I find that there is a spectrum of employers and service providers and partners that we engage with. Some people we engage with are like, absolutely, this is what we need to be doing. How do we sign on? And then on the other side of the spectrum, we can barely get a meeting. So I think that's probably the case in most communities. Where we focus our efforts is in aligning our goals. So in our region, one of our priorities is retention. We welcome a lot of international foreign workers into the community, and we all share the same goal that employers want to keep people in the area because we need workers. Our region needs that workforce, and that everyone is on board with that. So we want a thriving economy. We also want a thriving community. And so we can all agree that we want to keep people in the area. And in order to, no matter where they've come from, whatever language they speak, whatever country of origin, a lot of employers really do need people to work here. And they really struggle to get Canadian-born residents to come and work in the area for a number of reasons. So there is that recognition that we need to work together. So the first thing that we do is we say, okay, what are our shared goals here? We want to keep people in the community. You want to keep people in the workplaces. We all want people to thrive so they stay longer. How can we do that together? The charter is one step in that right direction.
Thank you. And so there is a question in the chat from Jacob Thomas. Any rough estimate of what percentage of the companies, organization that you have introduced this workplace inclusion charter, differences of character in those that embrace it and those that do not? My guess is that organization firms that are tourist focused would be less xenophobic than those in other industries, sectors where there is much more progress and work to do. Any rough estimates of what percentage you're able to introduce from the ecosystem that you have there?
Not currently. It's difficult to get an exact number because our economy kind of changes. I mean, like any community, we see a lot of growth in small businesses in particular. Every day there's X amount of new businesses starting. So I don't know the exact number of businesses. In our area, we have a number of large employers that have more employees, I guess. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is smaller employers jumping on board as well. So we have an employer that has 2 full-time employees. We have an employer that has 1,000 employees. So we know that it is scalable. What we also know is that those companies with human resources teams do have more resources to be able to implement the charter. But at the same time, they might have to implement those changes across multiple workplaces. And so the smaller organizations are sometimes more nimble. So even if they don't have dedicated resources, they are able to implement a policy within a week, as opposed to taking a few months in a larger organization. Most of the employers participating in the charter are in the hospitality and tourism sector, but we do have nonprofits, construction, and a mix. So we know that it can be applicable to different sectors as well. I'm just looking at the question here.
And of course, having government funding is a really clear, commitment from the top, and that this is something that is important, and it really is a strong signal that I'm sure had everything to do with your success as well.
Exactly right. Yeah, we are funded by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. And that message from the Canadian government is to really focus on local solutions. And so that's why I think we've seen a lot of success in this model, is it is really based on who lives here. It is based on the employers. And it's also an important part is creating a supportive ecosystem for those employers with local service providers and subject matter experts.
Well, thank you, Natasha. I wanted to address the elephant in the room, obviously, and what we are talking about. The root cause of the problem is really the cultural anxiety that has to do with mainstream population that are feeling threatened, that their identity is going to change by the influx of different cultures, different traditions, different languages. And so we all know that obviously American identity is a dynamic and fluid and evolving concept. And the US has always been a multicultural society. But wanted to see what thoughts you have about what exactly works in terms of changing this narrative, particularly Charlie Sherman here, and but also Vice Chancellor Kapil, Longani, and Dr. Alejandro Portes's reflections on especially with the backdrop that Dr. Portes shared with us, that really it's what works is the respect for traditions and languages and cultures, and the research that says, you know, there is positive aspects of this, what Dr. Portes labeled selective acculturation, but that is really viewed as a threat to a perception of what American identity is and ought to be. And so I wanted to turn it over to you for your thoughts on what works in terms of having people be more open to and having less cultural anxiety about the change that might or is happening around them.
Yeah, I can start, and thank you for that question. I'm interested in what the other panelists have to say. You know, what our research has really shown in the last couple of years, and I think this is no surprise to folks in this call from academia or organizing or other spaces, is the things that predict anti-immigrant sentiment have very little to themselves to do with immigration, right? And so in our studies specifically, what we've seen often that we've used, and this is with HIT Strategies, which is a polling firm that works for progressive organizations and some progressive politicians, they do a measure of anti-Blackness and a measure of how people think the economy is treating them. So not exactly where they stack up in the economy in terms of income or things like that, but how they feel they're treated within the economy. And we found in our research in the project that I mentioned prior that those are the two strongest predictors for someone's sentiment around immigration. If they are favorable pro-immigrant policies, if they think we should be a country of immigrants, all these other things, right? So I think that is an important consideration of the sort of elephant in the room, that a lot of the things that drive people towards anti-immigrant sentiment are part of, you know, larger forces of division that cross many different issue areas outside of immigration, right? That run through economic inequality, criminal justice, all these other things, right? It's sort of core philosophies that really intentionally divide different segments of the population. To what Natasha was saying, that I think is just such an important point in sort of doing some of this bridging work, is the starting from a place of shared values is really important. I think one of the reasons that the progressive movement, and particularly, you know, I work at a 501c3, but thinking about sort of like the electoral context too, that we've just had a lot of difficulty in really making the case and advancement for immigrant integration, is that, you know, we have in a sense shared values, but we don't really translate that into a shared vision for immigrant integration in this country, something that actually expands into people's flourishing and isn't just that, you know, people shouldn't be treated awfully, right? So I think starting conversations around those shared values and trying to make that gap between, okay, if we share these values, how do these actually play out within the immigrant enforcement regime? And the second thing I'd really say is like addressing the disinformation, the flawed mental templates that people have, right? People are going to fill in. I mean, this is just something from communications research more generally. People are always going to fill in blanks in information with their own assumptions if we do not fill in those blanks for them, right? And so, you know, there's right ways and wrong ways to do that. And we at the Opportunity Agenda have a lot of insight into sort of what some of the best ways are to sort of address those flawed mental templates. But I would say that those two things really going hand in hand are essential for kind of digging through what is really a communications and a PR problem within the immigrant justice movement, just as much as it is a policy and a sort of institutional problem.
Right, and also a media responsibility too of not sharing the misinformation. Thank you, Charlie. Kapil or Dr. Portes?
Yeah, I would just say, Dina, I also think that this is a multifaceted question, right? And some of this relates to, at its core, like, how do you rebuild trust with the immigrant population, that especially at a time that we're in right now, right? And so I will leave the academic aspect of this, or the non-legal academic aspect, to my far smarter colleagues who will comment on that. But from a legal perspective, right, at its core, trust is really about doing what you say you are going to do, even when it's not convenient or popular to do so. And our Constitution is the document that encapsulates the agreement between our government and us. And as you know, Dina, there have been many times in our history where the Constitution's guarantees were jeopardized by the president, especially when it came to foreigners. A great example of that was when Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. And the Supreme Court, in the infamous decision, Korematsu versus the United States, upheld the executive branch's decision to intern Japanese Americans just because of their foreignness. So how do you rebuild that kind of trust? From my perspective, historically, one way to do that is to hold our government accountable. Many communities within the United States have had their trust breached over the years, including majority-minority communities. For example, I worked for the late, great Elijah Cummings when he was chair of the House Oversight Committee, the most powerful committee on Capitol Hill. And he asked me to lead the investigation into the poisoning of the community, the majority-minority community in Flint, Michigan. As you know, that community was poisoned with the water in that community. Imagine turning on your faucet and what comes out is this brown-colored rust that you're supposed to bathe your children in, that you're supposed to give your children to drink. And as a result of that, these people suffered neurological damage. There's generations of people in Flint who will never be able to read, see, spot, run. And despite that evidence, the government was telling the people of Flint that there was nothing wrong with the toxic sludge that they were drinking. Mm-hmm. But thankfully, Dina, we have a government where the federal, state, and local governments split powers. And that's really good because it allows for checks and balances. In the Flint case, for example, the federal government, we remedied a wrong, a state wrong, right? It was the governor of Michigan that was poisoning the people of Flint, right? And it was the federal government that remedied that state wrong and gave the people of Flint justice. That's how you begin the process of rebuilding trust. It's accountability. Now we're in a space where the states, many states, including our state, are trying to stand up against the federal government. We all know what's happening in California and across the country, and it is critical that our state governments stand up. SUNY has been really clear about our commitment to our students. You know, while the government is busy canceling citizenship appointments for students who've been admitted or revoking visas and doing everything they can to make our foreign-born students feel unwelcome, particularly from countries that they deem untrustworthy, like China, it's our job to counter that narrative. And we're fighting that narrative legally by supporting our Attorney General in New York in terms of things like the student visa cancellations. And we're also working closely with the governor's office at the state level to ensure that our foreign-born students have access to resources that they need. So, for example, the Office of New Americans is a terrific agency. We've partnered with them to create a how-to guide, a Know Your Rights guide. And through our Office of Global Affairs, we've shared that training that the New York Immigration Coalition and the Office of New Americans put together. Look, trust is built and fostered by providing access to trustworthy individuals, resources, and environments for students to rely on in various facets of their experience. And so I think it's really critical that we join together with these organizations to ensure that our foreign-born students feel that we are holding our federal government accountable and ensuring that that compact, they came to this country because they had educational dreams, right? At SUNY, they had dreams that they wanted to achieve. And they came here knowing what our Constitution stood for. And to have that rug pulled out from under them
Mhm.
is something that should distress all of us. And we should do everything we can to promote and to hold our government accountable on all facets. And I'll say one more thing. You were talking about some of the challenges that we're achieving, immigrants in terms of achieving social integration and how we can address those challenges. Dean, I'll just say one thing on that point. I think here we have found language is a major obstacle, and it's certainly been one that I personally have felt. When I worked at New York City Hall, I was chief counsel to the mayor of New York City. And one of the best things about working in City Hall is you're in the middle of New York City in this incredibly historic building. And right outside City Hall is Broadway, right in the middle of the city. And one day my dad came to visit me at City Hall. He's an engineer. And he reminded me that when he came to the United States, he couldn't speak a word of English, not a word of English. And so for almost 6 years, he sold pens on Broadway, right? And when he came into my office at City Hall, he said, it's amazing. He says, when I look out this window, I can see where I used to sit outside and sell these pens because I couldn't speak a word of English. And so I think it's so critical to understand the impactful, like the impact that language and cultural barriers can have. And here at SUNY, we've done a lot of things, including offering credit for work experience and GED-like programs, which are especially helpful for individuals who've had careers in other countries, but additional academic credentials are necessary for them to study and work in the United States and New York. We also do a lot of cross-cultural engagement and experiences that are grounded in authenticity. And I think they're key components of our multicultural groups and programming on every one of our campuses. So I just think overall, a lot of obstacles, a lot of concerns in light of the actions of the federal government. But Dina, we've seen this story before. And we know the playbook, we know how to fight back to ensure that our immigrant populations do feel a sense of belonging, that the confidence that's been eroded in the wake of these policies is restored. But it's not something that happens overnight. It takes time, it takes partnerships. And I think SUNY, and in particular our chancellor and our board, have really been cognizant of that and have devoted significant resources to ensure that we are pushing back on this narrative that is making our students feel unwelcome, our foreign-born students in particular.
Thank you so much, Senior Vice Chancellor Longani. Dr. Portez, any thoughts on particularly, targeting the native-born population with different narratives, fact-based narratives about, what you referred to earlier, how acceptance or respect of traditions and cultures and languages and the selective acculturation is not really a threat. It's an asset to and a positive aspect for all communities.
Well, there have always been, see if I can get myself projected here.
Oh, we can see you. Yeah.
Okay, there have always been this tug of war between immigrants and the native population. The opposition to immigration and hostility is nothing new. The beginning of that is in the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th centuries, Italians were lynched in New York, from cities from New York and New Orleans, because of the opposition of the population. That happened to the Irish, the Italians, and so on. So it is not the case that the process of integration into American society have been a love fest in which the native population necessarily greets and loves the immigrant. The best thing that can be done is aside from this essentially to respect the culture and language of that population and leave them alone. Let them integrate at their own pace. The most successful model of integration in Europe had not been France or the Netherlands that have created models from above that is demanding that that immigrants assimilate as quickly as possible, give up their languages, and so on. The most successful model in Europe has been Spain,
Mhm.
and the Spanish model had been no model at all. That is, what the Spanish have done is leave the different immigrant communities to find their place at their own pace, in their own ways. And in addition to that, the governments, the regional and local government in Spain have supported the activities of immigrant organizations, the transnational activities of immigrant organizations, have provided support for the organization and have allowed them, gave them the space to integrate. This is how the process actually happens. On the other hand, of course, what we confront at present is a rise of militant nativism created by a series of historical forces that I do not have the time to review in the course of this conference, but that exist and are real. And so that is they have led to militant support by a large segment of the American population associated with what is called MAGA to this kind of hostility. That is the best way of countermanding that is to point out, not point out that you have to love each other, not point out because those messages are not going to work except outside the church sermons. What happens is the important thing is that immigration is absolutely indispensable for the workings of the economy. That the labor market cannot function without at both ends in terms of manual immigration and in terms of a high-tech immigration. Neither Silicon Valley nor the large farms and ranches that feed us could function without the presence of manual labor, of immigrant labor. That is absolutely necessary. And employers are not immigrant lovers. Employers are people who are very practical and who, at both the end of hiring tens of thousands of Indiana in Korean engineers, at the low end of hiring hundreds of thousands of Mexican and Central American farm workers, they are absolutely they find it in need. As a matter of fact, that is the one recent thing that happened, which tells us the way that this government so with the rhetoric is so hostile to immigrants and have had recently to instruct ICE to stop going to hotels, restaurants, and farms because they are depriving employers who are supporters of the present administration of their labor. So even them are backpedaling on their own rhetoric because of this thing. But outside of that, the best thing that can be said that can be conveyed to the American population is what had already been noted by a number of speakers. We are all children and grandchildren of immigrants. The United States would not be the greatest country in the world had it not been for the contributions of tens of thousands of Irish, Italians, Poles, and so on that eventually became part of what we call the American mainstream. There is no American mainstream that is limited to the English population, to the founders. It is a population that have been mixed like this. And if we are allowed, if the country is allowed to continue in that path, immigrant America would be America and would continue to be to be a great country that it is. Right now, that message is threatened by no other than the executive branch of government. And that is why institutes like yours and events like this are very important to bring about the fact that immigrants are not are people that are coming here to a freeload on the American economy to get on the welfare system. That's absolutely false. Immigrants are they're completely necessary for the very survival and the growth of the American economy.
And what a wonderful statement to stop at. We're out of time, unfortunately, so I'd like to thank Senior Vice Chancellor Kapil Longani, Professor Alejandro Portez, Charles Sherman, and Natasha Lay. Thank you all so much. We couldn't go through all of the questions in the chat, but there's a very important question that we should have addressed at the outset of this conference is how we define, and that came from Gloria, how do we define social integration, how we define community cohesion? Yes, social integration is the incorporation of foreign-born Americans into the fabric of their communities so that they feel a sense of trust, a sense of belonging, a sense of being part of the institutions, and it's a first step toward what we say, what we call community cohesion, which really is defined as having three elements, which is the having positive social relations, emotional connectedness to the community, whether it's the geographic community or the community that they live in, and orientation to the common good. So you really have a stake in the success of the community, and you hold each other accountable as community members to the well-being and welfare of community members. So apologies that we should have defined what we mean by social integration, social and community cohesion at the outset, but there they are, and happy to discuss it some more. If you have interest, please reach out to us, because right now we're doing a survey that operationalizes all of these concepts that we talked about.